So where to start? I was born April 2nd, 1939 in Atlanta, Georgia. My mom and dad, Mary and Tom Lewis, had met at the University of Georgia when they were both in college there. My mom grew up in Atlanta. My dad grew up in the country in a small town, Concord, Georgia, which is a couple of hours from Atlanta. I had no siblings at that time because I was the oldest. I was the firstborn in our family. I was named after my dad, Thomas Edwin Lewis Jr. And I was blessed, though I didn't know it because I was the baby, with a future of having a wonderful life full of opportunities. And these are the things I want to share with you today. When I came home from the hospital, we went to a place in Ansley Park in Atlanta, 102 Maddox Drive. The house is still there. I rode by it recently. And the park that I played in is across the street. It's still there. Ansley Park was where the governor's mansion of Georgia was at that time. It's since been moved way out on the north side of Atlanta. But it was a wonderful neighborhood, a lot of families, a lot of kids. And I was blessed with being able to grow up till my teenage years, almost there. The first event that I really remember and I've recalled all through my life was the Japanese bombing of Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941. I remember where I was. I remember what my parents were doing. We were in an upstairs bedroom at Maddox Drive, and they were painting a room that was my room. And the radio was on, and music was playing, and my dad was up on a ladder, and it was kind of a celebratory Sunday morning. And all of a sudden, the music got interrupted. I had no idea what was going on, but my mom and dad started crying.
This program to bring you a special news bulletin. The Japanese have attacked Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, by air, President Roosevelt has just announced. The attack also was made on all naval and military activities on the principal island of Oahu.
The details are not available. They will be in a few minutes. The White House is now giving out a statement. A Japanese attack upon Pearl Harbor naturally would mean war. Such an attack would naturally bring a counterattack. And hostilities of this kind would naturally mean that the president would ask Congress for a declaration of war.
And my dad, I remember, came down and picked me up, and he was crying. And I learned later that what had happened, the bombing of Pearl Harbor. My dad was a naval officer. He was in the Navy Reserve, and he knew that broadcast meant he was going to leave and go overseas, which he did. And he left in about 1943 and was gone till about the middle part of 1945. I was there with my mom. My sister was born shortly, Lynn was born shortly after my dad left. And I remember those days. I remember the stamps, war stamps you had to use to get milk and bread. I remember going with my mom to the store and using those stamps. I remember my mom listening to the radio, trying to get glimpses of what was going on. My dad was in the Pacific, is where he was sent. And he ended up being the military governor of Okinawa. There's not a lot I remember about those years he was gone. I learned later, decades later, what he did during those years when he was military governor. Actually, when the Japanese surrendered in the mid-40s, my dad received the surrender of thousands of Japanese soldiers on the island of Okinawa. As military governor, he was, appointed to accept them as far as their surrender. He shared one interesting story I remember with about a Japanese commander who was locked in, or it wasn't locked, he was back in a cave up in one of the mountains on Okinawa, and he would not come out, and he would not come down and surrender. And then my dad had to learn that the Japanese custom was that someone of his rank surrendered only to the highest ranked person on wherever they were going to surrender. So my dad got in a Jeep, his driver took him up to the mountain, they went to the cave, and out comes this Japanese, he may have been a colonel, he may have been a general, full army dress uniform, sword by his side, comes out, bows, and hands my dad his sword. And that was his way of surrendering. And I've kept the vision of that in my mind all these years. My dad came home in, I think it was late 1945. I was 6 years old. I had started to school. I'd missed him a lot. And I remember I was in maybe the first grade or maybe the second grade when he first got home. I rode the bus. I had to walk up to the park across the street, and I caught the bus on the other side of the park. I remember when my dad came home, I missed him so bad. I would get to the bus stop, and then I would forget my lunch. I'd have to go to the bathroom. I feel like my stomach is bothering me. And I'd go back home. I'd miss the bus. I'd go back home, and my dad would drive me to school. He and I talked about that in later years, and that was my way of spending more time with my dad because he had been gone so long.